welcome to BizTech's Marketing Show. Today we have Bharati Balakrishnan, Country Head and Director of Shopify India and Southeast Asia, as our guest to tell us more about Shopify's growth in the region and key trends that are shaping the future of e-commerce. Now, founded in 2006 and listed on the New York Stock Exchange, Shopify Inc. is a Canadian multinational e-commerce company that provides essential internet services and infrastructure for commerce. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Bharati.
Thank you so much for having us, Brian. It's wonderful to meet you.
Now, Bharati, for a start, give us an overview of Shopify and its journey in Southeast Asia over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I think this may be a surprise to many folks, but we've actually been in Southeast Asia for very long, Brian, over a decade now. And our journey really started with countries like Vietnam having a very vibrant partner ecosystem who are entrepreneurs in their own right, even before the merchants come, right? Who supported merchants go online with Shopify globally. So these were like several web agencies, service shops in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in Singapore, and multiple other countries in Southeast Asia. That was really like the first, I'd say, 5 years, starting the early 2010s. But I think around mid-2010s, something changed in Southeast Asia. E-commerce as a channel became viable, meaningful, and gave birth to the first, what we call digital native brands, who are like online first, if you will, as e-commerce hit the $10 billion GMV mark annually. And so we started seeing brands be born on the platform and grow up. This could be anyone from a Secret Lab to Beyond the Wine and so many more. And then in the last 5 years, Brian, I see increasingly the large established brands, right? The traditional brands who've been around forever, brands that you and I grew up buying and shopping from, have started taking their own website very seriously for a multitude of reasons. Of course, COVID sort of put steroids on that. But I think number one, they realized that we all discover brands, products, engage with our brands much more online today than ever before. Even if you eventually shop at a store, you're probably discovering a brand online first. Second, there's this ability to now talk directly to consumer versus via other channels, right? When it's your own website. And thirdly, it could be a meaningful sales channel that gives you real-time feedback to improve your offering and experience to your end consumer. So that's really sort of created a lot of momentum for us. And brands like Bata, Vina Milk, Eurotex, these are like well-known brands in their own right, in their categories, in their countries, who now build on Shopify Plus, our enterprise offering in region. So I think it's been a very exciting journey, but it still feels like we're just at the start of it in Southeast Asia.
Okay, so this is interesting, and I'm going to come back with some examples, ask you for some examples of success a little bit later on. But really, your remit is India and Southeast Asia. And as you mentioned, you've been in Southeast Asia for a long time. You've been here 10 years. It's an incredibly diverse commerce landscape. How has Shopify adapted to cater for the unique needs of consumers around the region? Because the consumers in Vietnam and the companies in Vietnam have very different needs for the ones in Singapore and Indonesia, for example, where you're also competing with hyper-local brands.
It's a great question. I think I'd go beyond saying Southeast Asia is diverse to saying Southeast Asia in the world of e-commerce is dynamic. Things are changing all the time. New things are being born. It's truly cutting edge in terms of what experience it offers end consumers, this region. There's a lot the world can learn from what happens in Southeast Asia. I think there are three key things we've done over the years that have really made us a compelling proposition for consumer brands looking to make their website a point of sale, right? Number one, Brian, it's very important to be local when you do business in Southeast Asia. So let's take basic infrastructure that powers commerce globally. You need solid payment partners. You need solid shipping partners, without which a merchant can't really even start business, right? Now, what does that mean in Southeast Asia? It's often not the same partner. So we, for example, partner with the top payment partners in each of these markets. So a merchant who's in business in, let's say, Philippines is using PayMongo, and the same merchant, when he's also running his business in Malaysia, is using EGHL or IP88 or FavePay, and so on and so forth, right? Similarly, on the shipping side, all the local bigwigs like a Ninja Van, like a JNT are our partners today, and they offer VR app store plugins to merchants to really make our offering complete in region. Number two, I always go back to saying Southeast Asia is not a country, it's a region. Now, what does that really mean for our customer, who is the merchant, who's trying to build a business in commerce, online and offline? It means that he or she is building a business not just in one country, but is often starting in Singapore, but shipping into Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines. You know, the other day I met a merchant who does excellent modest wear in Indonesia, who's now shipping into Brunei and Malaysia, right? We make that super simple with our offering, Brian. So with one license from Shopify, for example, you could set up, you know, the right customs, taxes, assortment that is common, not common, inventory points in different countries. Just make it easy to do business simultaneously in multiple countries. I think that is very important and a very unique thing to take into account when you think about what merchants need in this region. And finally, I think you cannot talk about Southeast Asian commerce without talking about social commerce. So it's not just about being on the marketplaces and being on your own website. It's also about using multiple social media channels for communication. I always say where consumers spend time is where they will spend their money. So it's really important to be present and make it easy for merchants to offer not just like Instagram and YouTube, which are globally available channels with Shopify, but also locally available communication as well as commerce channels, which is another focus area that I feel makes our offering truly complete.
Now, Bharati, India is part of your remit. How is that market, which is an enormous market and one market which everyone is now looking to for the next decade or so in terms of growth? Give us a flavor of the Indian market and perhaps some of the uniqueness around the Indian e-commerce market.
Sure. Actually, I find there's a lot of similarities across India and Southeast Asia. And I think for anyone looking to build a big business and looking for the next stage of growth in commerce, in retail, in the world, not being in India and Southeast Asia would really set you back if you think about the next 10 years, right? I think India is definitely one big country. So we're definitely not shipping as often to multiple countries like we do in Southeast Asia. But India has its own nuance when it comes to payments. UPI, which was sort of introduced by the government and embraced by the population, now does a few billion transactions monthly, Brian. And it's a very important form of collecting money from consumers. And at the same time, cash on delivery, which is when you pay for a delivery upon receipt in cash as an end consumer, is an important offering that our merchants need to continue to make to their consumers, because every day in India, there are new users coming onto the internet. And every day, some of those users are becoming shoppers online for the first time. So their trust takes time to build, and hence cash on delivery is a very important instrument as an example. I would say that across both Southeast Asia and India, we find offline first brands like these gigantic established brands like Avena Milk in Vietnam, or a Duraflex in India in the mattress category, or a Eurotex in Philippines. They're really embracing their journey on their website. They realize the value of omni-channel. They realize the value of selling more to their existing customers because they're able to also sell online to them now. And they realize that having a direct conversation with their consumers is super important in this new world that we live in.
Now, one of the things that a platform like you empowers, as you just mentioned, is really the ability for existing brands, perhaps sometimes only in single markets, to scale very quickly by partnering with you and suddenly develop an international business that they never had before. Could you share some examples then of really in detail how some brands have grown with you that way?
Yeah, it's one of those things that really excites me a lot, Brian, because if you think about how this happened 20 years back, even moving from having 10 stores in one city to opening your 11th store in the next city was quite a challenge, right? It was almost like an adventure. You went in with less information and more cash to deploy, and you hope for the best, right? Whereas today, I see brands, starting in Malaysia, and the example I gave you earlier of the modest wear brand Button Scarves in Indonesia, who's now selling into multiple markets in the region, but also this young brand Christy Ing comes to mind in Malaysia. They basically sell footwear as well as accessories for women. And they started in Malaysia and now increasingly ship into Singapore. Now, imagine this journey for a young D2C brand, right? That's cut its teeth, is seeing traction in one market, knows and has an instinct that there are customers in other markets in Southeast Asia who are relevant to his or her offering. How easy it is to sort of spin up one more store that is a .sg or a .vt, and then offer that same assortment, figure out your pricing, and speak to customers via performance marketing in those markets, understand who they are, what they want, and then more streamline your offering in those markets, test the waters, and then maybe when you hit a certain milestone in sales, decide to also extend that to an offline relationship, right? And open your first store, let's say in the most important city. So I'd go from selling in KL to selling in Jakarta because I've already tested the waters in Indonesia via my online store. That has just become so much easier. So you don't have to sit today and say, I'm going to do one country for 5 years before I think about how I expand, right? You could literally start on day zero. And technology really, that like folks like us provide, has hopefully made that a lot easier in a complex and vibrant region like Southeast Asia.
And one of the key things, and you just alluded to that, obviously, companies then going to new markets, testing out by starting off at e-commerce, but also the reverse has now happened post-pandemic. There are a lot of pure direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands that are now looking to set up physical stores in the markets that they've been operating in, simply because customers have now started to go back to physical stores.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think it's happening both ways, by the way, where the offline brands are taking their own online channel seriously, as we discussed earlier. Look, when I take a step back, I always think a brand is a brand is a brand, Ultimately, a brand that is successful and able to scale to a certain level is able to find its consumers across channels and is able to identify the right mix of channels for that brand, right? And none of this is really new to us, Brian. Even in the world of retail, where I spent a lot of time before I came to Shopify, we always had the EBOs or the brand outlets in a mall. We also had the department stores where brands sold into and found their consumers there. And we also had the high street stores and beyond, right? It's the same thing for online channels as well. You will sell on marketplaces and there's a certain value to that. But at the same time, it's very important to build an identity as a brand. And so your own website really does a great job in delivering that. And then eventually, if a lot of your consumers are still shopping most of the time offline, especially in categories like fashion, in home, where there's a lot of exploration, touch and feel before you commit to a buy, you have to be there as well. It's really about what's become easy today is where you start and how much you can scale before you explore channels that are either harder to succeed in or more expensive to succeed in.
Now, Shopify is such an empowering alternative or solution to power entrepreneurship. And there are lots of cases, and that Christy Ng example is an example of how you've taken a smaller business and allowed it to go multinational. Was that the inspiration behind the Shopify Entrepreneurship Index that you've just started? Tell us about that, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, I think our spirit and soul is all about empowering entrepreneurs. I think we've, our founder and leadership have always spoken about it. Our mission is to make commerce better for everyone. And we always talk about whether you're a young or an old brand, you're a new or an old brand, it's really about walking with you on the journey from hello to IPO, right? That's really what we're here for. And we always say to brands, look, you know retail and we know tech. And we're here to enable you so you can chase your dreams faster. And I think who better to start that journey with than with entrepreneurs, right? The Shopify Entrepreneur Index is a way to sort of tell the story of multiple countries who are really leading the charge on using entrepreneurship to drive growth in their regions, right? So Singapore is a great example of a country where Shopify merchants, Brian, add billions of dollars every year to both economic activity, which goes beyond just being a merchant and selling and really, creating the ecosystem around it, and also to GDP growth. Some other countries that made it to the top 40 that we announced are Vietnam and Indonesia, if I remember right, at 30 and 31. India's in the mix as well. And many of these countries, honestly, when you think about it, are really countries where there's an entrepreneur in every home, right? In some shape or form. So many women are entrepreneurs and do something on the side while they take care of their families. So many businessmen have, sort of inherited businesses from their families that they're taking into the future now. And if they're in the world of retail and commerce, hopefully they're using Shopify to grow faster and be part of the new digital world.
Now, Bharati, looking ahead, what are some key trends that you see in the e-commerce space in 2023, 2024?
Sure. I've got to say, there's probably three things I can think of, and two are very spoken about and have been spoken about forever. Number one is social commerce. I think it's really coming into its own stride. We've spoken about content creation and user-generated content and influencers forever, but I think we have come to a time when content is meeting commerce, when the way you or I buy in certain categories has completely changed, because we are discovering these brands first on a social channel where we're browsing mindlessly and spending time often. So I think the consumer journey in certain categories has changed. And you see that, right, in the way beauty brands, for example, are created today. A lot of it is watching someone, educating yourself on a product you didn't know that you needed, and on impulse clicking and buying. So I do feel like content is translating to commerce much sooner today than we've ever seen before. Number two is one of those things that we've talked about forever, but I think finally post-COVID, no one's having a debate. Everyone agrees that omni-channel is here to stay. And it doesn't matter whether you shop online or offline. I know you mentioned earlier that people are going back offline. Honestly, where I sit, I feel that a lot of the traditional brands have realized that, look, my customer is also going to come online, and here's an opportunity for me to increase spend per customer. He or she may still come like twice a year to my store, but if I can get them to also shop once more online, I've already changed the game for my business, right? And number three is the world of AI and what it's doing to every business, not just commerce. I think we at Shopify think it's a positive sum game. There's so much we're doing with AI to make sure our merchants are even more empowered as this becomes a game changer when it comes to technology, right? We recently announced something called Sidekick, which I don't know if you caught, and literally lives up to its name. It's meant to be a sidekick to our merchants who are sitting there every day and figuring out how to grow faster or how to be more efficient. And there's so much AI can do to empower that. And I think we'll continue to see that transform the world of commerce.
It's been a really educational conversation, and I've really learned a lot. Bharati, thank you very much for coming on the show. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I guess the one thing that's really close to my heart, Brian, is watching traditional brands grow up in this new sort of digitally transformed world. I always say to traditional brands, you have so much power in your hands, as you embark on this journey. A, you're a brand that every household pretty much knows in your country, right? B, you've got this distributed store footprint that is so accessible to consumers that you can use to ship fastest to your consumers, right? And when you combine that with getting your technology right, getting your operations and organization right, because so much about this is mindset change versus really like the brass tacks of process and system, right? Then when you unleash marketing on that, you really reach the next level of scale. So I'd love to have conversations with traditional brands about what the next 10 years could look like for them when they make these choices on technology and operations. That's something that's close to my heart and something that I'd love to continue to engage on.
Bharati, thank you very much for your insights, and thanks for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much for having us, Brian.
Now, we've been speaking to Bharati Balakrishnan. She's the country head and director of Shopify India and Southeast Asia. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to BizTech's Marketing Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.